Hello everybody and welcome back to Everything Created. So it has been about 4 months, shamefully, since I have uploaded last. So just to give you a little recap of what we did last time, we did part 1 of these petco actually, care sheets. And last time we did the millipede, and today I'm going to switch over to the next step up, leopard gecko. So just like last time, I'm going to start with the very front, and it says leopard gecko care sheet. Leopard geckos are available in a variety of morphs, including leucistic, high yellow, and albino. Unlike other geckos, leopard geckos have movable eyelids. It should say, unlike most other geckos, leopard geckos have movable eyelids, because there are some other gecko species that have movable eyelids. So they make it sound like leopard geckos are the only ones, which is not true, but they probably did not intend it that way, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt there. It says facts: average adult size is 6 to 9 inches. There are giants, but that is pretty much a good average range. Said average lifespan 20 plus years with proper care. Also true. I've even heard of one living up to like 26 years or more. They can get very old, so it is a good commitment, and you need to have good commitment if you decide to get one. Their diet, it says insectivore, which is once again true. It says they will reach adult size in 9 to 12 months under ideal conditions. Upgrade habitat size as your reptile grows. That is not something that you have to do. It is totally fine if you choose to start small and kind of upgrade as they get older. But if you want to go ahead and put them in the biggest enclosure they'll ever have, you can do that. You just want to add a lot of clutter, hiding places, and things like that, so they don't get worried or stressed. And also, they have a little disclaimer type note thing here at the bottom that I decided I would go ahead and mention. It says the information on this care sheet is not a substitute for veterinary care. If you need additional information, refer to the sources section or contact your veterinarian as appropriate. It says developed with and approved by a qualified veterinarian. So that kind of makes me nervous going into this. Okay, so it's hard to word things like this. Veterinarians aren't necessarily trained in the care of all reptiles. I mean, otherwise they would have to be extremely knowledgeable to know how to take care of your dog, your cat, any medical situations to do with any of those, and then the same thing for reptiles as well. That just doesn't really happen. So a veterinarian approving this care sheet means nothing as far as whether or not it is dependable, because veterinarians don't know everything. But neither does a hobbyist, so bear that in mind as well. It says the scientific name here is Eublepharis macularius. That's true. It says for a diet, a well-balanced leopard gecko diet consists of insects, including crickets, small mealworms, and waxworms. Use gut-loaded, which means recently fed, crickets no larger than the space between the gecko's eyes. Okay, so crickets aren't bad. Mealworms aren't like terribly bad. Waxworms aren't terribly bad. Nothing is bad in moderation as far as each insect goes. Crickets and dubia roaches are typically considered to be the two best, top of the line, at least for in America, feeders. And mealworms and waxworms are really, really horrible to give to a leopard gecko super frequently. They are very high in fat and well, at least mealworms are high in chitin, which is like the shell basically. They can't digest it. And waxworms are just really high in fat and low in nutrition, so it's something you want to give them as a treat, but they can actually get addicted to it, just like donuts. So you want to be sure to keep other things in moderation and stick to crickets and dubia roaches if you can as your staple feeders. And it says, things to remember when feeding your leopard gecko. Fresh, clean, chlorine-free water should be available at all times. Feed daily. Okay, again, not quite correct on feeding them daily. For a really young juvenile, you want to feed them every day. And then as they kind of get about halfway to adult size, which I think they say is around 6 months, you want to cut back to like every other day, and then every 3 days once they are fully grown. And it says sprinkle food with a calcium supplement daily and a multivitamin supplement once or twice a week. You can do that as far as with their feedings. I am not I don't remember the exact feeding schedule that they usually go with for a calcium and multivitamin use. I typically use Repashy Calcium Plus on every feeding, which is way easier, but again, it's because I use that, I don't know the actual supplemental schedule that most people use. And then it says housing. Appropriately sized habitat with secure cover. A 10 to 20 gallon tank is recommended for one leopard gecko. I do like that they actually seem to be against keeping two together, which is great, because a lot of people think that you can just throw two together, and you really can't. It's very dangerous. And I will say a 10-gallon tank is really, really, really small for one leopard gecko. In fact, that's borderline cruel. So you want to keep them in a 20-gallon tank at least, and then always more is better in any case. So it says for their habitat, provide multiple hiding areas with non-toxic plants, branches, logs, and cork. Maintain humidity below 50%. Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, so you want to provide typically a hide on the warm side of the tank, a hide on the cool side of the tank, and then a moist hide which will sit kind of in the middle, so on the warm side of the tank, and then kind of part of it is on the cool side of the tank. So that way they'll have a temperature and humidity gradient if they need to, as if if they're shedding or trying to digest food, they'll move around. And then it says substrate. Oh boy, here's where it really goes downhill. Use sandy chips, calci sand, or terrarium carpet. I have never even heard of the sandy chips. It's SANI chips. Never heard of it. It doesn't sound good. Okay. Oh, also going back to the humidity, it says maintain humidity below 50%. I would say 50 to 55% is actually just a fine humidity. If you want to keep it drier, just be sure you have that moist hide available at all times in case they need humidity. So carpet is one thing that it's kind of okay. I personally switched to a bioactive mix of a substrate because my leopard gecko got its teeth and claws both stuck in carpet. Whenever it would try to go for food, it would sometimes miss the food, and then she would get her mouth stuck in the carpet. She would get her teeth or her claws stuck in the carpet. It was just a big mess, so I switched over to a bioactive substrate, or at least a soil mixture, so where you can use organic topsoil and mix it with like 60% sand, like play sand, like you would get at Walmart or wherever, and then cap that off with dry leaves, leaf litter, and that kind of helps give them a variety of substrates that they can walk on. So they can walk on the leaf litter, then they can go walk on the loose sand, they can dig a little if they want to, and ultimately it is much more enriching and enjoyable for them. Now I'm going to go ahead and look down to this red flags area. It says weight loss or decreased appetite, mucus in mouth or nose, swelling, retained shed on toes, lethargy, bumps, sores, or abrasions on the skin, labored breathing, paralysis of limbs, abnormal feces. So these are all pretty good red flags. However, on the first one it says weight loss or decreased appetite. In leopard geckos, decreased appetite is fairly common as long as they maintain their weight. So if they're dropping weight and they lose appetite, then there could be a problem. But if they are just decreasing in appetite, I wouldn't really worry too much as long as their weight is staying good and as long as they eat sometimes. But if it continues on for more than a couple of months, you'll definitely want to take them to a vet just to be sure that something is not badly wrong. Then it says paralysis of limbs. That doesn't typically happen except in the rear limbs whenever they are impacted, which basically means they've ingested something and they can't pass it out. So substrates, again, that they mentioned earlier, the sandy chips and the calci sand, and those two things are very common for causing impaction. So that's why a lot of hobbyists will definitely recommend that you don't keep them on those substrates. For the temperature, it says a temperature gradient 95 for the warm end and basking area, and 78 to 88 for the cool end. A little bit hot on the cool side and a little bit hot on the warm end as well. I would say 85 to 90 for their you can either use like a ceramic heat emitter for their basking area, or basically just the place where they hide, where they stay a lot, stay warm. Or you can use a under tank heater, which just goes under the tank or sometimes under the substrate to help keep them warm. And that is usually something you'll want to set to 85 to 90. And then the cool end can be in the 70s. Anywhere in the 70s should be fine. Again, most of the information that I'm spitting out here, it's not all fact per se, but it is, a lot of people would agree with me. For the lighting, it said 10 to 12 hours of light per day is required because they are nocturnal. They do not require UVB lighting. An incandescent bulb can be used for basking area during daylight hours only. You can use a ceramic heat emitter or nocturnal heat bulb at all hours. The nocturnal heat bulb I wouldn't suggest, but I was actually kind of surprised to hear that they didn't recommend some kind of purple light. The nocturnal heat bulbs, I'm not sure exactly which one they're referring to. If they're talking about one of the purple ones or red ones, that's not okay. Do not do red lights for reptiles. If you look outside in the sun, it's not red. So, stick to, your typical white lights, or possibly a yellow hue to your light. You don't want it some crazy color, because that would hurt their eyes just like it would hurt yours. So 10 to 12 hours is good. And then they do not need UVB lighting. That's also a fact. Then the ceramic heat emitter, which is something I mentioned earlier, those can be used for all hours. And some people use those exclusively rather than a heating mat, which I believe is fine. It says, do not house 2 or more male geckos together, and do not house different reptile species together. I was almost excited there for a minute. You should not house any 2 leopard geckos together at all. They're not social. They do not like each other's company. They do not enjoy each other. Any of the cuddling or typical signs you'll see where they're together a lot, touching each other, bumping each other, things like that, that's not affection. I mean, they're not humans. That's not how they show affection. They honestly hate each other, and that is how they're trying to show dominance to each other. And they are very likely to get in fights, and especially since they're nocturnal, it is very easy to, you could be asleep in your bed whenever they fight. And you could wake up and, oh, this gecko is missing toes and it's missing a leg or a tail. And you don't realize what happens, but it's actually the other one that's in there causing the problem. So you'll want to definitely be sure to keep them separated. And then it says do not house different reptile species together. I also agree with that. It says normal behaviors. Nocturnal, which is active during the night, and they hide under rocks or burrow into the sand during the day. The only reason they would ever burrow is if they do not have an appropriate hiding place. They may dig sometimes, like some females will actually make little burrows to lay eggs, but they should never bury themselves. That is not something that you want to see. And so they'll hide under rocks or burrow into the sand during the day. Once again, like I said earlier, you shouldn't have sand, but if you have different rocks and hiding places like that, just make sure they're securely set up so they can't fall and crush the gecko. But aside from that, as long as you have a hiding place that's pretty dark, you'll be good to go. It says normal behavior. So leopard geckos will eat their skin when shedding. This is true. Most of the time, you'll see them gray one day, like as if they're just about to shed, and then the next day you won't see anything on them because they've already gone through and eaten all of their sheds, so it's all gone. Keep handling to a minimum, as overhandling can cause them stress. This may be true. I've never seen one get stressed out from being handled a lot, so I would say kind of use your own judgment on that. If your gecko is breathing heavy, or it is making chirping noises, or trying to run a lot, I would say it is definitely stressed out, and you'll want to leave it alone for a while, at least a couple of days or a day. It just depends on the personality of your individual gecko. They're all going to be different. It says never grab a leopard gecko by its tail, as they may drop their tail. This is true. It says habitat maintenance. Thoroughly clean and disinfect the habitat at least once a week. Place your leopard gecko in a secure habitat, scrub the tank and furnishings with a 3% bleach solution. Rinse thoroughly with water, removing all traces of bleach smell. Dry the tank and furnishings completely and add clean substrate. If you choose to go with a sterile setup, I would agree with that. If you do something like paper towels or newspaper as a substrate, non-toxic ink, of course, and then in that case you'll want to clean out everything because bad bacteria can grow in unnatural conditions. So if you use a soil mixture and then you add insects like springtails and then crustaceans like isopods to help break down the waste that's occurring in the setup, that will prevent bad bacteria from actually overrunning the setup, and especially the springtails. So you'll actually have a mixture, a balance, if you will, of good and bad bacteria growing together, and that's perfectly fine in that case. So if you have a bioactive setup, you do not have to clean it. Grooming and hygiene. Leopard geckos regularly shed their skin. Ensure that humidity of the habitat is at an appropriate level to allow proper shedding. To facilitate shedding, provide a shed box, a hide with sphagnum moss that will aid in the shedding process. I use a rock that has sphagnum moss underneath it for this, and just be sure and spray it every few days, keep it wet, so that way anytime that your leopard gecko wants a more moist area, they can retreat to that. Okay, it says signs of a healthy animal. Active and alert, clear eyes, body and tail are filled out, healthy skin, clear nose and vent, and eats regularly. So aside from the eats regularly thing, because some leopard geckos are just really picky. Again, it depends on the individual. Some leopard geckos don't eat regularly at all. They will refuse food, and then sometimes they will eat like a pig. So it just really depends on the individual. So I wouldn't necessarily say that eating regularly is a sign that your animal is in fact healthy. There could be other problems, even though it's still eating regularly. It says common health issues, gastrointestinal disease. I've never heard of it. It says runny stools, caked or smeared stool around the vent area, and loss of appetite caused by bacterial or parasite infection. I think it is interesting to see, I just looked through these others. It in fact did not mention one of the most common problems that leopard geckos get, and that is impaction. And it did not mention it even once here, so I think that's kind of interesting, especially since they mentioned sand earlier, and sand is one of the big causes for that. It says metabolic bone or vitamin deficiency, which the symptoms of that or causes of that is inability to absorb calcium due to insufficient UVB light or improper calcium and vitamin D supplements. If untreated, it can lead to a disorder characterized by deformities and softened bones, swollen limbs, and lethargy. Then it says your suggested action is to consult your veterinarian and provide ample UVB lighting and proper calcium and vitamin supplements. Okay, so this appears to be something that they kind of just copied and pasted from some other care sheets, because it said earlier that they do not require UVB lighting, and they don't, but you want to be sure your supplements have D3, because without UVB lighting they cannot synthesize D3 on their own. Okay, then it says respiratory disease, which is characterized by labored breathing and mucus in the mouth or nose. It can be caused by a habitat that is too cold or damp. Not necessarily by a habitat that's too cold, but too damp for sure. If your humidity is too high, it can cause respiratory illnesses, and that is pretty much anything that has lungs can get respiratory issues with improper humidity or improper air conditions. And it says consult your veterinarian and ensure habitat is the proper temperature. Again, you can also check humidity. There are gauges for that, you know. It says shopping list for needed supplies. Appropriately sized habitat, substrate, moss, a water dish, mealworm dish, hideaway place, climbing decor, plants, heat light, heat fixture, under tank heater, which is optional, it says, vitamin supplement, calcium supplement, cricket food, or cricket keeper, cricket food, cricket quencher, thermometer, humidity gauge, and a book about leopard geckos. The book is not required. We have the internet. And then it says here for cricket quencher, that is not something that you necessarily have to have. Crickets like to drown in water, so they made these water crystals that you buy already expanded and ready to go that you give to your crickets, and then they suck the water out of that. But if you buy the dried crystals online and use those and add your own water to them, it is way cheaper, and cricket quencher also has a lot of chemicals and things that aren't exactly ideal added to it, so I would definitely avoid that. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.